Good evening all. So we continuing the conversation from yesterday, right? We are continuing the conversation from yesterday. Remember, I was talking about the forces that trying to encourage, tempt, or rather force me, right, into starting back to break my vegetarianism or to eat meat again, right? So I'd like to just spend one more video, which is this video, speaking about that, right? Speaking about that meat eating scenario, and I'll do so from the perspective of the Quran, right? I will do so from the perspective of the Quran, right? So in the Quran it states that what God has provided, right? Tender meat extracts, meaning seafood, right? Food from the sea, fish, seafood, and so on, right? He has provided these things. He, she, it, the Creator has provided these things for your consumption, right? That is one, right? Which suggests that there is a moving away, right? Moving away from the harder forms of meat, pork, beef, all these things, right? And moving away from these things into softer flesh, right? Flesh, as an animal flesh, right? Fish and so on, right? Tending towards a human intelligent evolution, right? Tending towards a human intelligence evolution of your mind and evolution of your heart, right? So moving from eating the harder types of meat, beef, pork, duck, all these things, right, and tending towards more softer meats, and eventually with the aim of doing the reasonable and the most rational and the most heart-centered thing, which is to give up meat altogether, right? Which is to give up meat altogether, right? So God has provided, Allah, by whatever the name you call God by, He has provided what? Grains, food on vines, bodi, karaili, jengi, whatever you want to call it, pumpkin, right? Food on vines, food that grows on trees, right? Food on vines, foods that grow on trees, grains, crops, right? Provisions, all these things are provided, beans, greens, right? And this is for those who use reason. It's written in the Quran, right? It's written in the Quran, nothing more needs to be said, right? Like I said, the book has a complete knowledge, right? You don't have to abide by every single verse, every single thing, because there are some aspects that really need to be revised. But the book does have a complete knowledge, a complete understanding of how you could go about evolving your life, right? The book has a complete message, right? The message in it is complete, right? In terms of how you can step by step go about evolving your intelligence and evolving your heart, right? So, and the goal is, right, once you reach a point where you have successfully attained this, right, you have gone through the evolution process, you evolve from eating these harder meats, you evolve into eating seafoods, you further progress on your spiritual journey to altogether give up the meat, right? And then some go further into giving up dairy products and so on, which is some do it for health and others do it for spiritual evolution. It's not an agenda. It is not any agenda to force anybody into anything. These things are personal decisions, personal aspects in your spiritual growth journey, and it's not everybody, and it's not this is not the time and for every single person to do that on the face of the planet, right? Less people on the planet have the capacity to reach that. Is not something to force on anybody. It's not something to promote as an agenda, right? It's a personal growth, spiritual development journey, right? Which if we have several lifetimes, it could take several lifetimes to get to that point, right? So that is the aim, right, on a spiritual journey, your personal spiritual journey, right? Is part of the growth evolution spiritual journey, right? Growth and evolution spiritual journey, right? So tending towards that which cause least amount of violence within the world, right? Tending towards taking actions that tend towards least violence towards you, on your plate, and least violence towards others, right? Personally, and when there's a collective effort to do so, there will be a collective outcome, what you want to call heaven on earth, or creating an eventual outcome where there's least possible violence, right? Least possible violence towards each other, least possible violence towards animals, right? So That's the aim to reduce violence in society, right? So it starts with our own selves, our own personal habits, our own eating habits, all these things. It starts from that which we consume, right? So I wouldn't go about, so one of the voices is I do eat whatever you want to, I wouldn't go about telling anybody that. I should probably hear that, that's definitely not my voice, right? I wouldn't go about telling anybody, hey, eat what you want to eat, right? That's definitely not me, right? So that's covering that conversation. Like I said, even Muslims have bypassed this in the Quran, right? Even Muslims have bypassed these things in the Quran, and these things have been long, lengthy discussions and debates and all that, meat eating versus non-meat eating, all these things. And your own prophet, I've said this in a video when I was in England, your own prophet, right? Whoever the prophet was back then at the time, right? Your own prophet used to survive on dates, right? And I mentioned that you don't have to reach that point where you just live on dates so fast for your entire life or nothing like that, but is to tend towards violence reduction, right? Tend towards violence reduction. That's the whole aim of it, right? Nothing more, nothing less. Just tend towards, just strive towards violence reduction, right? Have a good evening, everybody, and tomorrow we'll go into a different topic, right? Good.